curious to know how grace is experienced or understood in contemplative non-dual practice. Is it distinct from gratitude? Because it seems to be pretty specific and commonly used in devotional forms of spirituality.
I like the word grace a lot. I don't use it so much, but I like it because it's one of those words that goes beyond the intellect. So its meaning is kind of vague, and no one really knows what it means, like beauty and love. So it brings us to a deeper. Can bring us to a deeper apprehension, experience of our life than words that our intellect thinks that has a neat and fixed grasp of. So grace, in Spanish, right, for you express gratitude, thank you, by saying gracias. And then the related word gratis is free, right? And gratitude is connected. So I'm not sure how grace is used in more dualistic religious understandings, like, I guess, a specific event that happens that's nice, you say, oh, that was God's grace or something. So I think the only difference in non-dual perspective is everything's grace all the time. There's no, the distinctions between this thing worked out and this thing doesn't work out is all based on our dualistic thinking. So when that's gone, there's nothing but grace. Grace can be a word for the miraculousness, the unexplainable wonder of presence, which never varies. The only thing that varies is our appreciation of it. Sometimes we're appreciating it, and much of the time we're caught in some less graceful, it's another good word that comes from it, less graceful mode, which usually involves thinking about our own problems and our, our dualistic, self-centered story.
And there is also, in Buddhism, it's commonly, I've seen or I've come across by grace of Buddha or the Buddhahood, or is it just an extension of the devotional aspect of it, elevating the Buddha consciousness and
Yeah, it might be. I mean, it depends who's saying it and what they mean, and sometimes these things are pretty vague, and it's not bad that they're vague necessarily. I mean, it can be really nice because sometimes we're moving from a dualistic understanding of religion into a non-dual, and the two get blurred, and you get this intermediary gray area. And you find that a lot in Buddhism, because Buddhism's core, I think, at least to a lot of us, is clearly non-dual. And yet, to become a religion of a whole culture, of a whole country, most people are not going to really understand deeply the non-dual. So for them, Buddhism has to function as a more conventional, dualistic religious understanding. But then you get everything in between. And I think you have that with Christianity and other religions too. I think it's maybe less explicit, because in Christianity, the non-dual understanding is more hidden, and it's more among the contemplatives and mystics, which are not amplified. Their voices weren't amplified in the culture. But still, people have their own experience where the Holy Spirit just takes over. So you have the Father and the Son and you as a sinner, and that's a framework you start with, and then at some point you just depending on your level of devotion, you just might enter into what might be called the Holy Spirit, which is the kind of emblem of the non-dual, I would say, in Christianity. But sometimes they say in Buddhism, this is all the appearances is the grace. I don't know if they'll use that word, but we could say is the grace of Buddha nature. In that case, it's pretty non-dual. We're just using words to talk about something that can't be understood. It's just the whole in its beauty beyond conceptual thought. That's Buddha nature. And someone else might mean it by the grace of Buddha, like there's a particular spirit somewhere that's individual that's giving me some special boon. Then it's much more conventional and dualistic. And it can mean anything in the spectrum between the two, so.
Fair enough.
What's interesting is you could say it with a dualistic understanding initially. Well, not just say it, believe it. But as you contemplate spiritual things, the unseen, realms beyond the conventional, one's mind just tends to open up a little bit, and I think even someone without an intellectual or philosophical perspective on the non-dual might actually have experience of that. I think it's nice to contemplate a little bit this word grace. I'm glad you brought it out. So when we say graceful, that doesn't sound like it's a religious subject at all, but I think it is. When someone does something gracefully, it's full of grace. It's full of divine inspiration, which really means, since everything is grace, it enables us, when someone does something graceful, it's helping us see that everything is grace. It's helping us see the grace. That person doing something graceful is less occupied with their self-story. When you're occupied with your self-story, you start to do things clumsily and harmfully and less harmoniously. Apparently, in the biggest picture, it's all grace, but it feels less graceful because we're veiled with our own thoughts and worries and concerns. And of course, even watching someone, for real gracefulness to happen, if you're, let's say, watching a graceful dancer, if they're really graceful, they can get a lot of people to drop their thinking and enter into grace. But it takes the audience too. If you're really consumed with some worry about what's happening after the dance performance, you probably won't notice the gracefulness or notice it less. Same with music or anything. So this gratis, this sense, it's freely given. Again, what's freely given is presence, ultimately. That's what's freely given. When we start separating things out and intellectualizing them, separating one thing from another, then the idea of exchange and value and credit and debt, all that arises. Things aren't free anymore. You have to do something. You have to do one thing to get another thing. And it's split in time, in space. But before all that, everything's free. Meaning it's immediately here, immediately available. No exchange necessary. It's very graceful. Gift. Giving a gift is a graceful act. Charging someone money for something is not so graceful. Because when you give a gift, you're letting go of the separation between you and the recipient. And when you're charging money, you're really maintaining that separation, that dualism. There's a chant in Buddhism. In Zen temples, it's often done before eating, the formal chant before eating. It's included, saying that may we understand. I'm just paraphrasing, but may we understand the unity, the oneness of giver, receiver, and gift. Say that as you're about to eat your meal, because that's, traditionally, if you're a monk, you were given that food as a gift. It's really, ultimately, it's just as beautiful as giving the gift, but in our culture we think giving is better. And it is in the sense that you usually we have a resistance to giving because we're selfish. So when you give, to some degree, hopefully you're breaking that, or you're loosening or weakening that self-clinging. Whereas receiving the gift, you might not do that much. You must be like, yeah, I got it. But actually, usually when you receive a gift, you soften up and open also.
You can't receive a gift gracefully. You can,
Yeah,
you can give gracefully, but you can't receive gracefully.
it can be hard to receive gracefully. Yeah, it's a great skill actually to really receive gift without that sense of guilt or now I'm in debt. See, normally we're so used to exchange for some kind of price, whether it's money or otherwise, that someone gives us a gift and we feel awkward often, because we're like, oh, they're giving me a gift, but really there's some subtext. They're not charging me money, but really I have to pay them back something. So that's not really being a receiver. It's like saying, oh, God gave us all this beauty, these trees and everything, I got to do something back for God. But that's not understanding your oneness with God. So that's really making a separation. To really receive, you're not even aware of me and the other person and the gift. It all doesn't matter. It's just happening. Beautiful, open, happening, unconnected to some future result and unconnected to duty or obligation or anything like that. So it's free, gratis, which also tells us it's grace. And gracious host. Any other ones anyone can think of?
They're all gifts anyway. Everything's a gift.
Yeah, there's not separate things even, so they're not many gifts. There's just gift.
Because, well, when you were saying about the benefits of receiving and what it is to receive a gift, I was thinking that a lot of people think they've earned even a gift. If someone gives them something, they'll think that they've earned that gift.
Right, that's like the opposite. What I said before is you feel indebted, like now I got to do something for it. That's if you think you hadn't already. So what you're saying is like,
The debt's been
you
paid back.
think you've already done it, you deserve that gift. So it's really payment from the other person that you're kind of expecting.
But if you could look at that in a non-duality way, couldn't you see everything like that? Like, because that's the way that I've seen. Well, like if you've done 40 hours work, then the money that you're given is a gift.
I'd say that's not a gift if you're connecting it to the 40 hours of work. Right, if you don't connect it, then it's a gift. Then you're seeing it as it really is. Everything is unconnected to something else we're thinking about it. In the most non-dual way we can talk about, there's one gift. It's grace, we can call it whatever, and it's always happening, and it's presence. It's just always appearing here, unconnected to anything that we connect it to in our thinking. And then we can step back from that ultimate perspective and apply grace in different degrees.
I suppose I just thought that people thinking that they deserve it. People think that every week when they get wages that they deserve it.
Right. So I would say that's mostly not in line with the non-dual understanding. So in the non-dual understanding, there's no person that could deserve it.
But ideally, you could get wages and not think you deserve it.
Yeah, I mean, if you let go and just stay present, you can do whatever. In a mundane way, we can do whatever. We can still buy and sell, because that's just the convention that people are using. But to the degree that we're in touch with the non-dual is the degree that we don't take it seriously. We don't get emotionally attached to it. I mean, money is an interesting thing because it's so abstract that for most of us, even with conventional thinking, it seems pretty clear that someone with a lot of money doesn't really deserve it. I mean, sometimes we have that belief in a culture, like if someone has a lot of money, A long time ago, it was the nobility, and they didn't necessarily, you knew they didn't work for it, they were born into it, but there was this idea that God selected them, you know. And then these days, we might not have that, but we have the idea that that someone was really smart, and so they arranged to get it. But if you give any kind of serious thought to it, you realize it has nothing to do with that. You know? So most of us realize if someone has money, they can do a lot of things with that physically, apparently, in the world, but it's not due to any merit. It's just, we call it luck or whatever.
Not grace.
Conventionally, we call it luck. They're lucky.
Why not immediately grace?
I don't think most people think that. Oh, they've been well, like I was saying, with the nobility in ancient times, people believed it was divinely inspired, that some people had advantage over others. So they might have said it was grace. I don't think people feel that now. I think there's actually some resentment if someone has a bunch of money. They're just like, oh, they're just lucky. To maintain holding money or any material thing more than you need is kind of also not noticing grace. If you notice grace, there's no sense of people deserving or not deserving. There's just the beauty of grace that you want to celebrate, and you just naturally, if you have material, you just naturally give it to whoever needs it. And soon you'll be pretty poor, I think. That's why most spiritual figures in touch with this, you know, didn't maintain being wealthy, but you can't really make hard and fast rules, I guess, about it. That's maybe the real mission of Touching Earth Sangha, to the extent that it exists because there's a bank account and money. What is the best, deepest way to help? So if anyone has a plan for that, bring it up, whether you're on the board or not. I mean, when you really don't believe that money has much to do with creating happiness for people, as I do, then it becomes a little difficult to know what to do with it. But what would be the most graceful thing to do with the money? Some people believe whenever someone asks you, you should just give it to them. A good friend of mine and several of yours thought that, at least at one point.
It's kind of like the other side of the coin. So when anyone offers them anything, they'll receive it. Do you know people who do that? I know people who do that. Well, with food anyway. They don't do it with
Oh, right. Yeah, I don't personally know.
Do.
Well, this same person does that to some degree that I'm thinking of. Grace is functioning perfectly when you're just open and present. The real gift is being received and given constantly. There's no separation between receiver and giver because you become part of grace happening. So conventionally, you know, what happens with an object is irrelevant.
So again, that goes with non-duality then.
That's
non-dual. It doesn't make a difference whether you take it or receive it in that. It's kind of could be the same.
Yeah, if your heart is actually totally open. But if you're employing intellectual concepts about whether something should be taken or not, that become rigid and separate yourself from somebody else, then you're less able to feel that grace and to be graceful about it. So I think it is a practical exercise that's useful in teaching us grace to accept objects and to give objects. I wouldn't make an absolute of it. I don't think you always should accept any object or give any object, of course, but I think it can be useful for learning how to be graceful, for learning how to let go of our separations and our distinctions and our rigidities. But ultimately, if you're seeing everything as grace, then objects become totally irrelevant. I mean, any object is the same as any other. You know. Practically speaking, just useful things should go to the people using them, if their using feels wholesome. It's a Sufi word, something by the grace of God. It's said a lot. To really understand grace, I think, in this non-dual way, you have to not check at all. Not check your experience. Checking your experience is already trying to evaluate whether you're getting something out of it or not, and there's this separate you getting something. So instead, really just letting go of that other person, that person who gets something out of life or out of experience, or is benefiting or going into debt. So that checking mind is so often with us, even when we're meditating, evaluating what experience is good and what is bad. For whom? We're making up this other person. But really, it's just happening as it is. When there's no other person there, that's grace. presence just fulfills itself now. It isn't dependent on anything coming or any plan or any extraneous circumstance. You can't grasp grace. Only letting go.
Yeah, as you point out, the vagueness of the meaning for both grace and beauty encourages us to drop judgment.
Yeah. Grace is already given, so we have such a habit of, I have to do something. I have to do something to get something. So it really puts us in that place of, I can't do anything. I can't do anything. It's what's already happened.
So if I lose a leg, could that be grace? Would that be grace?
There's no you and there's no leg to be lost in
No, but
grace.
if everything's grace, would that be grace?
There's no you. There's no consideration. Generally, if we lose a leg, we'll be very deep in dualistic anguish. But in presence, that doesn't happen. So the idea, I've lost a leg, there's no I and there's no leg to lose. It just doesn't happen. In the presence I'm talking about, it's complete now. So as soon as we take up the idea of gaining something or losing something, we are veered from it. So that's how death itself evaporates. You only have death when you raise the idea of a person. What's happening here is before the person. What grace is before the person arises. Not temporarily before, but beneath. Or more fundamental than. So no one to gain or lose anything, and nothing to be gained or lost. All that is fabricated distinctions. They're not here fundamentally. And that's grace. Once those ideas are there, grace is obscured. And there's gain and loss. So we can contemplate this philosophically, but more importantly is actually experiencing just awareness itself being complete. Not awareness doing something for you. Before that you arises. Just awareness. That's what Sun called don't know mind. You don't know anything. So you can kind of ask yourself, am I willing to live that way? But if you actually practice it, I think most people find everyone finds it's more interesting than living in the world of self and other, and gain and loss. It's always a stress. Even if you think things are going your way, the gain and loss realm is always a stress. It's really important to think that, to sense that, I think. But just awareness being, gain and loss is gone. To bring it back to your question, then that's this ultimate true gratitude then. It's not gratitude for something and to someone. It's grace fulfilling itself, grace taking over.